ANSI standards, folks, you need to be aware of them. You need to understand, how do you include GLA? What do you do with stairs, right? How are stairs counted? What counts as basement? What doesn't count as basement?
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
And welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out once again in the podcast chair. We're going to talk ANSI today, ANSI. We're going to talk Fannie Mae. I want to pause here and remind you we are sponsored by three great, wonderful, incredible companies, one of them being Working RE Magazine. Working RE, of course, is the magazine that keeps you informed on what's happening in the appraisal world. Folks, check them out. Go to workingre.com. Again, it's workingre.com. A la Mode is the software that you should be using for your appraisal write-ups. Why? Because of the many, many tools embedded in the software at no extra cost. Check them out. Go to allamode.com. Again, it's ALAMODE.com or 800 Allamode. And DataMaster, saving appraisers time, saving appraisers money, saving you time and money if you'll jump on their website and check them out. It's datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. All right, folks, I guess you've heard by now that Fannie Mae, effective April 1, 2022, has officially adopted ANSI Standards, folks. Some of you are saying, Dustin, what is ANSI Standards? Well, in case you're living under a rock, it stands for American National Standard Institute, ANSI, ANSI, and they've had a standard for many, many years on how to measure a house. Now, ANSI is not just about measuring. That's usually what appraisers hear about and relate to because, well, that's what we do. But ANSI has many, many standards for many, many things. But one of the standards that they have is how to measure a home. And it is just one of the standards out there. There are others out there, as you might know. And I guess the question is, what have you been using in the past, if any? Remember that, again, ANSI is not the only thing out there. You've also got the AMS, and there are others on how to measure a home. And frankly, there's a lot of rogue. Shouldn't be. We should all be under some standards here so that we are measuring correctly. But, you know, this has been a problem for many, many years. And I think this is probably where Fannie Mae is coming from. I can't ever claim to get in the head of Fannie Mae. Never would claim to understand. But I can imagine that there were some meetings about the concerns out there concerning home measurements. In fact, I was recently in a meeting where a home measurement expert, this is someone who has spent hundreds of hours measuring homes, not as an appraiser, and comparing his measurements that he felt were pretty accurate compared to some standards, if you will, or some benchmarks such as MLS and county records. And he found, and I'm pulling this number out of my head, I know I'm close, he found that 17%, or that most homes were off by 17% or more, either too small or too large. And one of the comments that he made, and I thought it was insightful, was how in the world are we so far off with something so big? One of the things that he mentioned was the fact that this is one of the biggest, one of the largest investments most people will make, and that's their home, their real estate, or their investment properties. And yet most of them, and I think you will all agree with this, when was the last time you heard of a borrower actually going out and measuring the home? Now, I'm raising my hand. You can't see me because this is audio only, but I'm raising my hand because every single time I purchase a home, whether it be an investment property or my own home, I measure it. I don't trust and don't just take at face value what I find on the MLS, and neither should you, especially as an evaluation professional, especially as an appraiser, somebody who actually knows what they are doing, which, by the way, we're going to come back to here in just a little bit. But if we've got this problem across the nation, and I think that many of you can vouch for this. In fact, let me just give you anecdotal evidence that this is true. I often, in my masterminds or at coaching or in the All-Star team. By the way, we just hit 200 in the All-Star team, which is super, super cool. Anywho, let me kind of share with you what often happens when I talk about one of the processes that we use in our office. And usually I share this process as part of the efficiency side of things, right? How can we save time without cutting quality? And one of the things that I bring up is that I pay somebody in my office to look up, find the county sketch, and to sketch it into total before it's uploaded to me in the field. So when I get to the field, about 80% of the time, it would be 100% of the time, but only about 80% of the time is it actually available from the county, I have a starting point. And when I share that, somebody typically raises their hand and interrupts me and says, but Dustin, the county's usually wrong. Well, right, I never said I use the county sketch and I trust it implicitly. No, I say I start with the county sketch. It's a starting point. And when I go out there, I can say, okay, let me spot check this wall and that wall and the garage, and especially the second floors. That's where I find most of the discrepancies. Most assessors don't know how to measure second floors. And so I'm extra careful up there. But folks, I can tell you that most of the time I change that sketch. Most of the time I don't just take it and say, yep, looks good. There are times when I spot check a wall here and a wall there, and I'm looking at the sketch and I'm walking around the property, and yes, it looks like it's accurate. And again, I've spot checked enough walls to know that if I was off on this side, it can't possibly be off on the other side. And so I may not be measuring 100% of the walls when I do that, but I am measuring enough that I can verify, or more likely, edit the sketch. But it's easier for me in the field to edit a sketch than it is to start from scratch typically. Now sometimes I get out there and quite frankly, it's a disaster. Sometimes I get out there, look at it and go, holy smokes, not a chance, right? Delete, let's start from scratch. It does happen. But most of the time it's at least a starting point, right? And the reason I tell you this story is to, again, give credence to this individual that I was in a meeting with recently who said that most homes are off, at least his experience was 17% of the time they were wrong, and significantly wrong. I think he used 100 square feet or more, right? That's kind of a big deal. So folks, what are we doing to make sure that we are working with a standard? And it's frustrating. I can't tell you how often, for example, I will go out to a property, measure it, and it's a purchase, and you've got a discrepancy with regard to the square footage that the MLS reports, that the realtor is selling this on. Now folks, I understand most MLS sheets at the bottom say, hey, this is our best guess, this is, we did our best with this, but the buyer is encouraged to measure. How many of them actually do it? I'm telling you folks, almost none, right? Almost none. And yet we are buying these huge investments without even verifying what it is that we're buying. You would not go out and buy a king-size candy bar that looks like a regular-size candy bar without throwing a fit. Right? Something that cost $1.50. And yet we're spending $1 million on a house without verifying what the square footage is. It's ridiculous. How often have you gone out to a condo or a townhome at some project where everything is uniform, right? And you've got 3 sales in the project, and your subject says 1,259 square feet. And every other comp says 1,300, 1,400, 1,500, and you know they're identical. You know they're the same square footage as your subject, and yet you personally measured the subject, and you know how to measure a condo from the interior walls, and you know what happened, and yet it looks off. It looks like your particular unit is an anomaly. Now, I can tell you what I do in that situation. It might be different than what you do, but I don't make an adjustment for size between the subject and comps 1, 2, and 3 that show 150 square foot higher. But I do make a comment and say I personally measured it, and I know that all of these units are uniform, and they're wrong and I'm right, so no adjustments made, right? But then what do you do with comp 4, 5, and 6 that came from a different project that are not uniform, that may and probably are off as well? It's a dilemma. It's a difficulty. And I think, again, trying to get into the brain, if you will, of Fannie Mae, I'm assuming that they have recognized this problem and have said, you know what, folks, we need a standard. Now, there's already going to be a problem with this. And I think you've already gone there in your brain, but let me just put it on the table so we can all admire it and see it and look at it. And that is, we've still got the issue of, okay, Fannie Mae saying, okay, let's go to the ANSI standard for appraising, but what about other real estate? We've still got the same issue that we've always had, where the appraiser is probably right, pat on the back, appraisers, nice job, you're doing a great job out there, but what about the realtors? Let me briefly tell you a quick story before we go to the break, and then we're going to come back and talk more about ANSI, what it is, how you can learn more, because this is something you're going to need to know if you haven't already. I've told this story before, so I'll just make it brief, but years ago I had a trainee who went out, and this was one that was allowed by the client for the trainee to go out without a supervisor in tow. And I sent my trainee out, and by the way, this trainee had been with me 18 months at this point, well versed in how to measure a home. He went out, and I'm just going to use made-up numbers because I don't remember. It's years and years ago that this happened, probably 7, 8 years ago. But he went out, and let's say this was for a purchase, by the way, and let's say it was being sold as a 1,300 square foot home, right? He went out, and he measured it at about 1,000 square feet. and came back and said, Dustin, this doesn't match the MLS, but I'm darn sure. And I said, okay, no problem. Let's go with it. So he starts to pull comps. And he had already pulled comps, by the way, on the 1300. We typically pull comps before the inspection. So he'd already pulled comps based on the 1300. But guess what? The purchase price was supported. Let's call it $350,000, just for hypothetical purposes. So $350,000 was supported all day long at 1,300 square feet. The problem now is that the home is only 1,000 square feet, that it is mislabeled, misreported on the MLS. And all of a sudden, that $350,000 house is now worth $275,000. Right? Because that 300 square foot made that much difference. When we threw out the old comps and put in new comps, it made that big of a difference. Well, as the diligent, good professional that I am, I picked up the phone and I called, let's call him Chuck, because that's his name. I called Chuck and I said, Chuck, we got a problem. Let me tell you what's going on. And I explained the situation. I said, all day long, your purchase price is supported at $350. I've got comps to support that, no issues. But once we move to the 1,000 square feet, all of a sudden we have an issue. Oh, by the way, I left out a part. Before I called Chuck, I got on my little car and I drove out to the property. It was a vacant property, and I measured it. And at first, honestly, I questioned my trainee, right? He'd been doing it 18 months, but I thought, maybe he got it wrong, right? Maybe it's closer than we think. I didn't have any doubt that it was probably smaller than what was being reported on the MLS, because that wasn't uncommon. But 300 square feet? Well, I went out, I measured it. Guess what? My trainee was spot on. I think I was within 20 square feet of what he, maybe a little bit here and a little bit there was different, but for the most part, we were identical. And it was 1,000 square feet. So when I called Chuck and I said, hey, here's what's going on. I just want you to know, this is a smaller home than what's reported. It looks to me like you've just used the assessor's data. And he confirmed that. He did not measure the property himself. But we did talk through the situation. He, unfortunately, was not as professional as I was trying to be. In other words, he was not professional at all. Raised his voice, said this is a bunch of blankety blank blank. And I said, Chuck, buddy, calm down. Here, let's talk through this. I'm calling you as a professional. I'm letting you know what the situation is. And he says, it's 1,300 square feet all day long. I said, I'll tell you what, let's meet out there this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And I will measure it with you. I will show you what is happening. He agreed to that. We went out there, folks. The very first thing he did was question my laser. How can that thing possibly be spot on? I said, listen, I've got 100-foot tape in the car. I can use that. But let me show you. So I took the tape and I took the laser and I measured a wall, and I measured a wall, the same wall with the tape. So with the laser, with the tape, and guess what? Boom, boom, shocking. The laser was right. So he agreed, okay, fine, the laser will work. So we went around and I'm calling out the numbers as we go around the property, right? And he's walking around with me. We get to the end, I show him the final results, and yeah, it's 1,000 square feet. He, I kid you not, folks, called me a liar to my face, said there's no way that's right. And I said, Chuck, we just did it together. Let's go around again, backward. I literally walked around clockwise the first time, counterclockwise the second time, came up with the same measurements. He again threw up his hand, said this is a bunch of bullcrap, got in his car and left. I'm not joking, folks. I realize you're listening to the story and say, come on, Dustin, you're exaggerating. This is what happened, folks. I kid you not. By the way, I've never talked to that guy again, ever. But this is the situation. And guess what? We came in at $275,000. Again, I'm using hypothetical numbers for purposes of illustration. But this is an example of where the appraiser and the realtor can be so far apart. Guess what, folks? This change with Fannie Mae is not going to change that. That being said, I think this is a good change. Now, do I agree necessarily that ANSI is the way to go? Not necessarily. I've got my issues with ANSI, which I'll talk about after the break. But I do think we're moving in the right direction, in the sense that the more standard we can get, the better off we are. The more standard we can get, the better off we are. I want to pause here and remind you of 3 great companies. Folks, if you want to know about ANSI and the changes that are coming, or anything else that's happening in the appraisal world, you want to be signed up for the free newsletter that comes out on a regular basis from Working RE magazine. Folks, Isaac is an amazing editor, an amazing guy who is on top of what's going on. I have had dinner with Isaac. He's a friend of mine, folks. This guy knows his stuff. No, he's not an appraiser. He knows his stuff. He is forward-thinking, and Working RE magazine is where it's at. Check him out. Go to workingre.com. Again, it's Working REs and workingrealestate.com. We are, of course, sponsored by Alamode Software. Alamode I've been using for almost, golly, folks, it's almost 3 decades now. 26 going on 27 years that I've been using Alamode. My dad, who trained me, used Alamode before that. And folks, they have changed so much over the years and have made incredible strides into helping appraisers to be more efficient, more effective at what they do. That's their goal, and that's what they accomplish. You can check them out and find out more at alamode.com. Pick up the phone and call them. You will actually, if you call during business hours, you will actually hear from a real live person and ask any question that you have. Check it out. Go to alamode.com again, or call them at 800-ALAMODE. Speaking of a company that has all kinds of great tools built in that allow you to save time, folks, I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of money every year paying somebody to do data entry. How would you like to have that done for you? DataMaster will do it for you. DataMasterUSA.com, DataMaster, or DataMaster, as the case may be, USA.com. All right, folks, welcome back to the program. We're talking today about the changes that are coming. Again, if you have not heard, Fannie Mae has adopted ANSI standard for appraisers, right? This will go into effect April 1 of 2022. And I know what you're saying, well, Dustin, am I doing ANSI standards? If you're asking the question, folks, the answer is probably no. You might think you're doing ANSI standards. Check your templates, right? Check your appraisal reports right now. My guess is some of you have ANSI, you quote ANSI as your measuring standard, but I hate to say it, some of us maybe have put that in our reports and maybe we haven't really truly been trained in ANSI, or it's been so long that we've maybe forgotten some things, or maybe we never really did it to begin with, right? That could be a problem moving forward, folks. Again, here's the good news. The good news is I like standards. I like the ability to be able to all get on the same page. I think that's an effective and good movement, right? The problem is that now we are held liable for that, right? If Fannie Mae's requirement, and most of us, that's what we do our appraisals for. For those of you who do private work, those of you who work for government, those of you who do other things, this is not going to affect you. But for most of us, 80+% of us that do Fannie Mae work, whether it be directly through lenders, directly to Fannie Mae, or through AMCs, this affects us. As of April 1, 2022, we need to be familiar with and understand and know how to use ANSI standards. Well, how do we do that? Well, folks, shout out here to a friend of mine, Mr. Hamp Thomas. If you're not familiar with Hamp, you need to get familiar with Hamp. He literally wrote the book on ANSI, right? It's called Home Measurement Standard Real Estate Square Footage Guideline by Hamp, H-A-M-P Thomas. Okay, look it up. You can buy it. I encourage you to buy it. There's also a great educational program out there, a webinar, if you will, a course that you can take through another group of friends of mine. And of course, you've heard of these people. Appraiser e-learning. Go to Appraiser e-learning on the internet and check out the ANSI standard course. It is a great course. It will teach you what you need to know. Folks, does that count toward my CE? Does that count toward my continuing education for the... It doesn't matter, folks. You need to know ANSI. You need to know ANSI, and you need to be doing it right, okay? A couple things to keep in mind when it comes to ANSI. And by the way, let me just dispel a quick myth here when it comes to Fannie Mae. There was an announcement made that it was coming out, and they mentioned that no hand-drawn sketches would be allowed, and there was kind of an uproar on the internet for a brief period of time. People said, "What do you mean? I can't go out to I can't use my grid paper anymore?" Folks, we're not talking about hand-drawing the sketch on site. By the way, you should not be doing that, right? Use Total, use mobile, sketch on your computer, okay? That being said, if you're still going out with a clipboard and pen, there's still no problem doing hand-drawn sketches in the field. Just don't put them in your report, okay? I know some of you are saying, really? There's people that put, I don't know. I mean, Fannie Mae said it. There must be a few coming through. I don't know, right? But ANSI standards, folks, you need to be aware of them. You need to understand, how do you include GLA? What do you do with stairs? Right? How are stairs counted? What counts as basement? What doesn't count as basement? What about those crazy attic spaces that have the sloping roof? How high do they have to be? How wide do they have to be? Folks, this is stuff that is all pointed out in ANSI standards. How close do you need to measure on the outside, right? How accurate do you need to be? Can you be to the nearest half foot? Can you be to the nearest foot? By the way, I'll give you a hint. The answer is no on both of those, right? But this is the type of stuff that you need to know when it comes to ANSI standards. You need to take a class. You need to read a book. You need to do whatever it takes between now and April, because as of April 1, no, this is not an April Fool's joke. As of April 1, you will be held accountable for ANSI standards when it comes, of course, to Fannie Mae work. Folks, if you want to know more about, I mentioned earlier that our all-star team has now hit a record high of 200 plus people. This is a small group when you think of the overall appraisers, but a group of active appraiser business owners who are improving their lives, improving each other's lives. Folks, these are the kind of things that we're discussing. People jump on our private Facebook group. No, you cannot find it, you cannot see it unless you're invited, and ask these awesome questions, and never will they be ridiculed. Never will someone say, "What a stupid question." We will simply be respectful and answer your question. It's a great group of people, not to mention all of the other benefits. Check them out. It's the All-Star Team group on theappraisercoach.com.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
A shout out to a friend of mine, Mr. Hamp Thompson, who has written the book, as it were, on, sorry, editor, I need to back up. I mispronounced his name.